In today's video, we are going to be doing some fall upcycling and some pumpkin making crafts. I have this flannel shirt, which is very well worn and had a bunch of paint on the sleeves, and it is time to thrift it and make some money off of it. So what I'm doing is I'm going to be making pumpkins. So I'm trying to get that sleeve to be as straight and smooth as I possibly can. And then I'm going to cut out a rectangle. Now for the pumpkins that I'm going to be sculpting, these are sculptured pumpkins. I like the length to be half the width, or the height. So I am looking at, I believe this turned out to be 7 inches, and I made the width 14 inches. And then I cut it out and I was ready to start my pumpkin. A sleeve on a short is tapered, but I want a rectangle. So I am cutting right through where the seam is, and then I am going to cut away kind of that triangle. And that's the nice thing about working with plaid. You have lots of lines you can follow, so you know that it will be straight. And I will have square corners. So once I get this whole thing cut, I am simply going to sew up that one side, actually the side that I'm cutting, and leave the top and the bottom open. So I've cut both sides, I've cut both of those triangles off, and now I have a rectangle, and I keep flipping it because, believe it or not, the color is so much brighter on the back side that I decide to use the back side for my pumpkins. And you can, if you look at any of the pictures of the original shirt, you could see it's a different color. And now I'm going to use that other sleeve, and that's the one with the paint on it. And I'm going to make another pumpkin. And I am doing it the exact same way. The only difference is I was able to cut it a little closer to the top, so my second pumpkin turns out to be a little bit bigger. However, I still use the same formula. The width is, I believe on this one, 14 and a half or 15, and the height is half of that. I love to use old flannel shirts to make pumpkins. I rarely can find one that is orange. They're usually blue, sometimes they're green, some browns, but it was fun to find an orange one that I could actually use. And I get them at thrift stores. I get my flannel shirts at flea markets or yard sales. I picked up 10 of them at a church rummage sale for 50 cents each. That was a great deal. Okay, now I have both sides, and I'll be sewing this one up, and then I'm ready to continue my pumpkin sculpting. I don't know if it really matters to get it this accurate, but Look at the difference in the color when you flip it over. One side is so much brighter. So now I have sewn up that short side, and I have kind of like a tube, a fat tube. I'm just flattening that seam with a pair of scissors, and I am making a threaded needle with heavy duty upholstery thread so that I can sew a running stitch along one edge, pull it really tight, and gather the bottom. So what I like to do is do a couple back stitches. Even though I've knotted it, I like to do a couple back stitches because it really secures the thread, which is important when you're going to be stuffing something. You're going to be putting pressure on it. So making sure that your thread is very secure is super important. I make the stitches about 1/4 of an inch and just keep going around the whole edge. And we're going to call this the bottom. And once I get to where I started, to the beginning, I will pull it really tight. Again, I'm going to do a couple back stitches and I'm going to tie it off, and I will have my pumpkin will be ready to start stuffing. So I pull it really tight, and you do want it really, really tight. And again, a couple back stitches, probably 3 back stitches. And I also like to go across just, and then a couple more stitches just to make it nice and tight and know that it's going to be secure, because this is where I am going to put the most pressure. And then once I tie it off and I cut the thread, I'm going to turn it right side out, and we're ready to start stuffing. And I am using just a polyester polyfill. That is what I used for all of my pumpkins. Originally, I used to put some beads in the bottom to make them heavier, but it didn't make any difference, so I don't bother with it now. And I'm just going to keep putting little bits all around to shape my pumpkin of polyfill until I can't put any more in. I need to stuff it pretty firmly, but I definitely want to leave a space at the top because I have to reverse the same thing I did in the bottom and do gathering stitches and pull my pumpkin really nice and tight. And I really do push that stuffing way down and really push as much as I can in there. And then it's time for the running stitch on the top. And I do exactly the same thing. Just about 1/4 inch stitches, go all the way around. Back stitch at the beginning and back stitch at the end. And then you end up with this kind of like a ball. Once it is tied off and the thread is cut, it is ready to sculpt it. And this is the fun part of making the pumpkins. It's kind of rounded. It is just like a ball and it bounces because that polyfill is pretty firmly stuffed inside there. I am going to be making 8 lobe pumpkins, which means I'm going to divide this pumpkin into 8 little lobes. I am using a even heavier duty upholstery thread, and I am using I believe this is a 6-inch needle and at least 10 feet of thread, and I do have it doubled. And to start with, I just do the same thing I do. I knot it, and then I do a couple back stitches. And to make the sculpting, you take your needle and you bring it through the center, out the bottom. Of course, after you do your 2 back stitches, and of course this one had to get all messed up. This heavy duty, it is very heavy duty upholstery thread, and it literally is polyester, so it does knot real easily. Okay, the needle goes through the top, comes out the bottom, the 6-inch needle. And I have made on my Amazon page, I've made a whole collection of items that are useful in sculpting pumpkins and making stuffed pumpkins. So you can check that out. The link will be in the description. And now I'm going to bring it up to the front, to the top. And it's going to go back down to the top to the bottom. And all the time that I'm doing that, I'm holding that thread that I pulled really tight to get a little indentation. I'm holding it with my other hand. I'm going to pull this so you can see how it starts to shape the lobe. And I'm directly across from it. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Pull the thread down to the bottom and go up from the bottom into the top. And I'm actually going to have all 8 lobes done here so that you can really get an idea of what I'm doing, but I'm going to fast forward it from this point on. So it's just doing the exact same thing. You pull it down from the bottom, wherever you want that indentation. And I just do it in fourths and then I do it in eighths. Hold it tight. Put your finger on there and hold that tight, and then put the needle back down through. Bring it out. And I always make sure, what you saw me do there was I was pulling the thread from the last one to make sure that was tight. And I keep doing that all the way till I got all 8 of them done. This does take a little work and a little concentration for what you are doing, but your pumpkin will come out looking like a real pumpkin, and it's definitely very cool to have it sculpted like this. And I'm going to show you some of the other ones. You can see them kind of on the side that I've made. And for the stems, I sometimes make them. We sometimes use little sticks. And then sometimes I have real pumpkin stems because we grow pumpkins, and I'll have a lot of little stems that I just save to use in my pumpkins. Been making these for years. I sell them every year at my fall shows, and I very rarely have any left. Those are a few flannel ones left from last year, but I would bet that I've made hundreds, and I have probably 6 left. Before I knock this off, I lock it by going back and forth in and out of the top and the bottom, just to lock the sculpting and the pulling of the thread. And today we are actually going to be making our stems out of IOD clay. So stay tuned and we will finish these pumpkins with handmade clay stems. So here are a few of our flannel pumpkins from last year. These two actually have real stems from real pumpkins. You sort of can't tell, but you look and see how different they are. And this is a stem we made from IOD clay, and I gave it a twist like a real pumpkin stem would have. And the only issue with these is I made these a little too long and a little too thin, and a couple of them did break. And when they break, all I do is go back in and just paint that little top part that's left, and they come out fine. So I'm using IOD air dry clay, and I am just going to take a little glob and start sculpting it. Now, a pumpkin stem is very, very uneven. It's kind of really rough. So this is one of those times where you get your fingernails into the clay and it makes a big difference. It actually makes it better and better. So I just use a really tiny, you'll see, you don't need very much clay. Tiny, tiny little bit of clay. I want to make sure I don't make the bottom too fat for it so that it doesn't rest right in the bottom of my pumpkin. Just kind of shape it like a stem. And then I get out an awl. I'm going to make lines and ridges. And then I stick my fingernails in it. You want it to look rough and rustic. Some pumpkin stems, they cut. Some of them, you can tell they just pulled them off when you get your pumpkin. And a lot of times that the top part is pretty rough. So that's what we're doing. We're roughening up this stem with clay and making it as realistic as possible. So I need to make 2 stems because I made 2 pumpkins. And what I do is I paint them with I think I'm going to be using a chalk style paint. And then I wait till they dry. And then I will wax them. And the wax kind of, if you can push the wax down into the grooves, it kind of has the look of dirt, which if dirt got on those rustic stems, it wouldn't have come off even in the rain. So they look much more realistic with the wax on them. And I paint them a grayish. Sometimes I paint them goldish, sometimes a little bit green, but these are going to be tan colored. I do get a little fussy with these stems. I keep going back and forth trying to make more indentations, more places for the antique wax to go. Okay, so these pumpkins, they dried overnight and now they are ready to be painted. And there are my 2 pumpkins there. So I am just going to paint them. I'm going to make sure they fit, and I know they fit. They don't look great when they're white, but once they're painted, they'll be perfect. My pumpkin stems are dry from the chalk paint, and now I am taking some antique wax, and I am using Miss Mustard Seeds antique wax, and I try to push it into the crevices and the cracks of the pumpkin stem. I wear a glove because I'm obviously doing it with my hands, but it seems like it may be a little easier with a brush to get it down into the crevices. So in a minute, you'll see I bring out a brush and then I just wipe some of it back. So there I am with the brush, really trying to get that waxed into the crevices of the stem. It makes such a huge difference. It's always harder to work on these little tiny things than it is to work on big things. But it's all in the details, so it's worth the effort. And it dries pretty fast, the wax. And then I take a glue gun and glue them on to the pump. Wipe some of it back to make sure that it looks realistic. Put a little more wax on. That'll wax on, wax off. And once I like the way it looks, put it aside and get my glue gun. Here's the easiest part of the whole project. Just putting some glue, hot glue, in that center part where all of the threads meet, pushing it down. Dries pretty fast. And then doing the other one. I never had any trouble with stems coming off of the fabric once they're glued down.